Miles Parker lived a quiet life on the great ship Aurora Dawn. It was not a small vessel. It was like a floating city, full of shining halls, endless corridors, and thousands of people who all seemed to know what they were doing. Miles worked in the communications center, a large room full of screens, blinking lights, and quiet voices. Every day he checked signals, replied to messages, and made sure data moved smoothly between the ship and the outposts spread across the stars. He was clever at his work, though most people did not notice. He liked being unnoticed, found peace in routine. In the morning, he would drink a cup of black coffee that tasted half like rust and half like comfort. He would check his screens, log the daily codes, and pretend not to hear the officers arguing about diplomatic reports. Life on the Aurora Dawn was safe and steady, and Miles wanted nothing else. That changed on a quiet afternoon when a strange signal reached the ship. It was weak and full of static, but there was something rhythmic inside it, something that sounded almost like a voice. Most of the staff ignored it. To them, it was just another faulty beacon in space. Maybe the echo of a long-dead vessel. But Miles had a patient mind. He turned his chair toward the main screen, adjusted the frequency by the smallest amount, and listened again. The sound grew clearer. Pause. Then a tone. Then another pause. It was not random. It was a pattern. He ran a quick code check and felt his heart start to race. It was an old distress format, one that had not been used in decades, buried deep in the archives. It warned of an energy field that could trap entire ships. If they moved forward at their current speed, the Aurora Dawn would be caught in it within the hour. Miles pressed the command key and sent his report straight to navigation. No one answered at first. 10 minutes passed. Then his screen filled with commands from the bridge and the voice of Captain Adams barked out through every speaker. Emergency halt. Full system check. Shields up. The entire ship trembled as it pulled to a stop. Lights flickered. Then the danger passed. They had stopped just short of the invisible trap. Miles sat in silence, staring at his hands. Round him the office buzzed with new life. Officers shouted orders. Engineers cheered. Someone clapped him on the shoulder, grinning wide. His discovery had saved them all. Did not quite know how to react. He only did his job after all. That evening the message came. It was sealed with the royal crest. The Queen herself, the ruler of all human settlements beyond Earth, wanted to meet him. He read the message 3 times just to believe it was real. He had never even seen her apart from official photographs. She was said to be young for her position and known for her calm intelligence. Her name was Queen Celia Marin. People spoke of her with the kind of admiration that made ordinary men blush. The meeting would take place in the Royal Hall, a place on the upper level that Miles had never entered. He checked his reflection in the mirror before leaving his tiny cabin. His uniform looked too plain, his boots too dull. He practiced a bow, failed at it, and sighed. 2 guards led him through a long passage of glass and silver light. He could see the stars outside, burning quietly. When the doors opened, he stepped into the hall and almost forgot to breathe. The room glowed with soft amber lamps. Long tables ran along the sides, filled with nobles and officers. At the far end stood the Queen, tall, graceful, surrounded by gold and white banners. Her gown shimmered with tiny moving lights that looked like captured fireflies. Miles walked forward, trying not to trip over the edge of the carpet. His heart felt too loud in his chest. The Queen turned toward him with a small smile that was neither cold nor warm, just steady. He knelt awkwardly. He had no idea what to say. But when she spoke, her voice was calm and clear. "Mr. Parker," she said, "your quick thinking saved not only this vessel, but every life aboard. You have my full gratitude." He swallowed and, without planning, answered truthfully, "Your Majesty, you are astonishingly elegant." The words slipped out like a secret escape. He wanted to bite them back at once. The hall went silent. The air itself seemed to stop moving. Everyone stared. The Queen lifted her chin slightly, regarding him as if he were a riddle. Then, to his amazement, she smiled, the kind of small, real smile that people do not make for show. "You notice," she said softly, "what others overlook." The music started again. The tension dissolved. But Miles remained frozen, his cheeks burning. He had spoken his honest thought aloud, and somehow, instead of being punished, He had received a smile from the most powerful woman in the known worlds. That night, as he walked back through the glowing corridors, his steps echoed softly in the empty air. He could still hear her words in his mind. He had no idea what they truly meant, only that they left him more awake than he had ever been in his life. Miles could hardly believe what had happened that evening. All through the next morning, people looked at him differently as he walked through the ship's corridors. Some smiled, some whispered behind his back, and some stared with surprise, as though they had never noticed him before. A few tried to ask what the Queen had said to him, but he only smiled nervously and said he did not remember much. The truth was, he remembered every single word. He replayed that short moment in his head again and again, while pretending to focus on his work. The Aurora Dawn was calm again, after the danger had passed. The great engines hummed softly, and the long windows showed the endless dark of space dotted with stars. Miles sat in his seat, surrounded by the familiar glow of his screens. But he could not stop thinking about the Queen's expression, or the way her voice had sounded. He did not understand why she had smiled. Maybe she was being polite. Maybe she thought he was foolish. What? But there had been something in her eyes, something that made him feel she meant what she said. That night, another message reached him. It was short and polite, carrying the royal crest again. The Queen requested to meet him once more, this time privately in the observation garden. Miles read the message 3 times and then just sat there, stunned. Only the highest officers or foreign leaders were ever invited there. It was a space meant for peace and quiet. What could the Queen want with him? He changed into his clean uniform, brushed his hair twice, then sighed, because nothing could make him look like someone worthy of a royal meeting. The guard who came for him said nothing all the way there.
Ow!
The echo of their footsteps followed them through long glass tunnels filled with dim golden light. The observation garden was not made of soil or plants as he imagined. It was a round chamber filled with graceful metal arches covered in growing vines that seemed half real, half light. The soft glow of distant suns passed through crystal panels above. Miles stood there feeling small and unsure. The Queen entered quietly through another door. She was wearing a simple robe instead of her ceremonial gown, and somehow she looked both ordinary and extraordinary at once. She walked to the wide window and looked out at the stars. Miles bowed quickly, almost dropping his balance, and then straightened up awkwardly. "Mr. Parker," she said, turning to him with the same calm tone. "I wanted to thank you again without the weight of the court listening," he stammered. "Your Majesty, I only did what anyone would have done." She smiled faintly. "That is not true. Many people would have ignored that signal. You listened." Her gaze turned back to the view outside. "Do you often feel unseen on this ship?" she asked after a pause. Miles hesitated. "Maybe sometimes," he admitted. "Suppose most people are too busy to notice the quiet ones." She nodded gently as if she understood. When people stop noticing the quiet ones, they miss the voices that remind us what we stand for. The small, honest things. Miles did not know how to answer. He had never spoken like this with anyone, much less the Queen. When she turned toward him again, there was no distance in her eyes, only attention. "Tell me," she said softly, "why did you call me elegant? You could have said wise, strong, or brave." The question struck him unexpectedly. He thought for a moment, trying to find words that would not sound foolish. "You carry yourself in a way that makes people feel calm. Even when everyone else is nervous, you are steady. That is elegant, I think." The Queen studied his face, then smiled again. "Most people think elegance is about clothing or grace. You see it as calmness. I like that." They spoke for a while longer, their voices low under the humming of the ship. She asked him questions about his life before joining the fleet. He told her about his small hometown near the coastal plains, where he used to watch the weather screens flicker at night. He spoke of his father, who had been a short-tempered repairman, and his mother, who had laughed easily at everything. To his surprise, the Queen laughed too, a bright sound that echoed lightly around the glass chamber. Soon the lights dimmed to show the ship's evening cycle. Their shadows stretched across the floor. The Queen walked beside him for a moment and said quietly, "You speak with honesty, Mr. Parker. People like me live surrounded by ceremony and silence. It is rare to hear words that feel real." He managed to reply, I never thought a simple sentence could bring me here. Her eyes flickered with something like amusement. Simple words carry weight when they are true. Before leaving, she turned once more toward the windows, her reflection glowing against the light of distant suns. "You have a gift," she said. "Not one of bravery or command, but of seeing." Miles stood still long after she left, his mind tangled between disbelief and wonder. He finally made his way back through the corridors, the same path he had taken before, yet nothing looked the same. The walls felt warmer, the hum of the engines smoother, and the stars outside brighter. He did not understand what was changing, but something inside him whispered that his life on the Aurora Dawn would never be as quiet again. The days that followed became strange for Miles Parker. Ever since the meeting in the observation garden, the Queen had begun sending small requests to speak with him. At first he thought it was some kind of error, or that she simply wanted a clear explanation of the signal incident. But no, every message carried her seal and her personal signature. The guards had grown used to seeing him and barely raised an eyebrow when he passed through the high doors. Their talks were never about royal matters at first. She asked about small things, simple things. What kind of food he liked, what planet he would visit if he could choose anywhere, what he thought about the sound of the ship at night. At first, Miles answered timidly, afraid of saying something wrong, but slowly he relaxed. The Queen had a calm way of listening that made even awkward silences feel safe. One day when they spoke, she told him, "The higher one climbs, the lonelier it becomes." She said it without sadness, just as a fact. Miles did not know how to reply, so he simply nodded and said, "That sounds heavy." She smiled then, warm and distant at the same time. While their talks continued, the crew began to make their own guesses. Some believed Miles had been promoted secretly. Others whispered that the Queen was seeking a personal advisor. One rumor said they were preparing a diplomatic experiment to test how common citizens thought about leadership. Miles ignored all of it, but it was impossible not to notice the way people looked at him. His life, once invisible, had become interesting to others. Still, Miles focused on his duties. The Aurora Dawn was moving through a cluster of systems rich in energy resources. Tension between two colonies had grown because of shared mining rights. The officers in the communications center worked long hours, trying to help the colonies reach agreement. Arguments over messages grew sharper each day. The Queen finally decided she would handle it personally, calling for a live conference between the leaders of both colonies. That morning, before the meeting, she sent for Miles again. He entered her private chamber, and this time, her expression was serious. "Mr. Parker," she said, "you have a talent for plain words that reach the heart. I want your help." He looked stunned. "Me, Your Majesty? I am not trained in diplomacy." She shook her head slightly. "Sometimes trained words are too careful. People stop hearing honesty when it is wrapped in formal language. I need language they can feel." He stood for a moment, trying to gather his thoughts. "Then maybe," he said slowly, "we should remind them of something simple. That they are all human. That their homes, their families, their children need peace more than they need pride." The Queen's eyes lifted toward him, and a small, approving smile touched her lips. "Yes," she said. "Is that right, that tone for me?" They worked together for the next hour, building the message line by line. Miles kept every word simple and clear, while she adjusted a few phrases for diplomacy. At one point, she stopped writing and said quietly, "When people talk to me, they often use words decorated like jewels, but they mean very little. You bring stones, solid and honest. You remind me what speech is meant for." Miles flushed at the compliment, unsure what to say. When the meeting began later that day, the communication hall was full. The leaders from both colonies appeared on large screens. Their voices were tense at first, proud and cold. But when Queen Celia began reading the message, Miles helped her write. Her tone was firm yet warm. She spoke simply of shared roots, of how both worlds had once been one family. Silence stretched for a few long seconds. Then one of them nodded. The other followed a moment later. The dispute ended not with shouting, but with tired smiles. Applause filled the hall. The tension that had covered the ship for days lifted like fog. Later the Queen asked Miles to stay behind. The lights dimmed until only the soft glow of screens remained. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "You changed the mood of worlds today," she said quietly. Miles felt his throat tighten. "It was you, Your Majesty." "You spoke." She shook her head. "I only gave voice to your truth. Do you ever wonder how one sentence can shift the weight of history?" He smiled faintly. "I never thought about it until recently." The Queen walked closer to the wide window overlooking the stars. Her reflection shimmered in the glass. "You were meant to notice what others do not," she said.
Ow.
"To see between what is said and what is silent. It is a kind of gift. It might be the rarest one." Miles stood behind her, unsure whether to speak or stay silent. He felt the strange sense that the space between them held more meaning than any words could. It was not something romantic. It was something deeper respect, mixed with an unusual closeness neither of them fully understood. When their meeting ended, Miles walked through the corridors again. The ship was peaceful, hums steady, lights calm. But something inside him had shifted. He felt lighter, but also more awake. He had never imagined that an honest comment could bring him here, to this place of quiet power and strange friendship. And he had the distinct feeling that whatever was beginning between him and the Queen, it was far from over. The Aurora Dawn moved through the quiet stretch of space between two star systems. Weeks had passed since the Queen and Miles had settled the conflict between the colonies. Peace had returned, and the ship's daily rhythm was calm again. Yet for Miles, calm felt very different now. His work was the same, and his screen still blinked in soft colors. But his mind wandered often to the private talks with the Queen. He did not fully understand what they had become to each other. Only that when she entered a room, the air itself seemed to change. One morning, a call came to the communication center. It carried the highest level of security and was marked with the royal seal. The Queen was calling a full council session. News spread quickly through the corridors. A major mission was being planned, and everyone could sense that it would be important. When Miles arrived at the council room, officers already filled the long table. Queen Celia stood at the center, dressed in a plain dark uniform, her hair tied back. She looked more like a captain than a monarch. "We have received a signal," she said once the room grew silent. "It came from the border zone near the silent sector. It appears to be human. But the sender claims to have been lost for decades." A murmur passed through the officers. Lost ships were like ghosts in the galaxy, and most people stopped speaking of them after a few years. Miles felt a chill run up his spine. He remembered the old distress code he had deciphered weeks earlier and how close they had come to disaster. The Queen looked at him. "Mr. Parker, you found that last signal before anyone else. I trust your instincts. You will analyze this one as well." He bowed slightly. "Yes, Your Majesty." Over the next hours, Miles and his small team worked in silence. They cleaned the signal, traced its origin, and tried to match it with old fleet records. The pattern was weak but recognizable. It came from a ship thought to have vanished 20 years ago while exploring a mining route. The message contained a short plea for rescue, followed by unknown code fragments. When the Queen returned to the communications center, Miles explained his findings in simple detail. She listened carefully and then said, "Prepare a rescue coordinate plan. I want to see this myself." The command surprised everyone. Captains volunteered to go in her place, but she refused. "If someone is alive out there, they deserve the strongest hand of welcome," she said. "We do not hide behind rank when there is a chance to save others." That evening, the ship changed course. The Queen insisted Miles join her on the bridge, tried to argue that his place was in the communication room, but she smiled slightly. "You will be needed to read the signal in real time. Besides, it is better to see what you help us find." The crew worked through the night. Stars drifted past like dust in the dark. When they reached the border of the silent sector, sensors went wild. Strange energy storms flashed across the void, forming bright arcs that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The Queen stood at the forward view screen, unshaken. Miles sat beside her console, keeping his hands steady even though his pulse was racing. Suddenly, the signal grew stronger. A faint voice broke through the static. It was human, weak and slow, repeating one phrase again and again. "We hear you. Do not lose our light." For a moment no one spoke. The Queen's eyes narrowed. "It is not just a plea," she said softly. "It sounds like a memory. They pushed forward carefully until the lost vessel appeared on scanners. It was drifting without power, scarred by years of radiation. Docking crews prepared for entry. The Queen turned to Miles. "You will come with me," he swallowed hard. "Me, Your Majesty?" She nodded. "I trust your understanding of quiet things. This place has been silent for too long." When they boarded the derelict ship, the air smelled old and heavy. Dust floated like thin fog. They moved through the narrow hallway in beams of white light. The rooms were empty, but in the control room, they found a single recording still running. A tired voice filled the speakers. It was a message from the ship's old captain recorded long ago. He spoke about losing power, losing faith, and his hope that someone in the future might hear them and remember their mission to spread light among the stars. The Queen listened in stillness. Miles watched her face, and he knew she felt what he did, a reminder that even in silence human voices could cross time. She looked at him and said, "When this message was sent, those people believed someone would care enough to listen. And you did? They left a small beacon inside the lost ship to preserve the recording for history." As they returned to the Aurora Dawn, Miles felt the weight of the moment settle gently inside him. He had not only heard the dead, but he had honored them. Later, when everything was quiet again, the Queen met him near the viewing deck. The stars outside burned softly like old candles. "You seem troubled," she said. He took a slow breath. "Those voices stayed with me. They had nothing left, but still they spoke. It makes me wonder how much meaning even one word can carry." Her eyes turned thoughtful. "Words are what remain when time forgets our actions. You have reminded me again that truth lives in small sounds." For a long time, neither of them spoke. They stood side by side, watching the stars. The silence between them was no longer empty. It carried everything they could not yet say. A quiet respect, steady and real, brighter than any light beyond the window. When the Aurora Dawn returned from the rescue mission, the whole fleet celebrated. The lost vessel had carried only recordings, but those messages had touched every heart across the Commonwealth. People spoke about courage, hope, and the quiet heroism of those who had been forgotten. The Queen received endless thanks for leading the operation. Yet she mentioned Miles Parker in every speech, saying that without his listening ear, the voices from the past would have remained unheard. Miles did not enjoy the attention. Reporters asked for interviews, officers saluted him too often, and strangers nodded at him in the halls. He preferred peace, not praise. Still, he knew something important had changed. His work no longer felt small. It carried weight. One morning, after most of the ceremonies ended, the Queen sent for him again. This time it was not for a mission or a briefing. The message simply said, "Walk with me." He met her near the upper promenade, where long windows opened into the silent reach of space. The lights were soft, and the endless black stretched far beyond. She was wearing no crown, no jewels, only a simple coat. She looked less like a ruler and more like someone at rest. They walked side by side, their steps echoing lightly against the floor. For a while, neither of them spoke. Miles kept his hands behind his back, trying not to fidget. The Queen stopped near the long window, her reflection joining the stars outside. "Do you remember the first thing you ever said to me?" she asked, her tone gentle. Miles smiled with embarrassment. "I remember too well, Your Majesty. I called you elegant. It was not a proper thing to say." A small laugh escaped her, warm but quiet, yet it was honest. "And that one word has followed us through every step since." He nodded slowly. It was a strange path from one clumsy compliment to all this. She looked out the window again. "It is strange, but sometimes life changes because someone dares to speak the truth without planning to. People who are too careful forget that truth does not need permission." For a moment, they just stood there, both silent, both thoughtful. Outside, a trail of blue light crossed the dark sky from a passing ship. "Duh." The Queen spoke again, her voice softer now. "You have changed how I see my own work, Miles. Before I thought being ruler meant always speaking with control. You reminded me that strength also means listening." He shifted uncomfortably at hearing his name from her voice, but could not hide his gratitude. "You gave me a place to be heard. I would have stayed hidden behind my screens forever if not for you." They turned and continued walking. Crew members who passed bowed deeply, but the Queen barely nodded. She seemed far away in thought. At last she said, "The council has asked me to return to the capital for a long session of policy reform. It means I will have to leave the Aurora Dawn for some time." Miles stopped walking. "That will change everything aboard the ship." She smiled faintly. "I want you to stay here and continue your work. The ship needs voices that keep it human." He hesitated. "It will feel quieter without you." Her gaze softened. Quiet is not always emptiness. Sometimes it is a place for meaning to rest. Later that day, the Queen's departure ceremony filled the central hall. Officers lined the walkway as she stepped onto the shuttle. Miles stood among them, modest in his simple uniform. When she passed by, her eyes met his only for a brief moment. It was not a look of farewell, but of understanding, something complete in itself. The next few weeks felt strange. The Aurora Dawn kept moving, steady as always. Miles returned to his regular station, answering messages and translating codes, yet everything he did felt different now. When he looked out the window, he no longer saw distant lights. He saw the trace of every word, every silence, every story that had passed through his hands. One evening, he sat alone in the observation garden where he and the Queen had spoken so often. The vines glowed gently in the dark. The stars spread like dust across the glass dome. He remembered her saying that honesty is rare but strong. He smiled faintly to himself. A small message tone sounded on his screen. The sender's code was royal. He opened it quickly. It contained only one short line. "Remember, elegance is truth made visible." For several moments, Miles stared at the words. He could almost hear her voice, calm and sure. He laughed softly, not out of pride, but out of wonder at how far such simple honesty had taken him. Years later, people would still tell the story of how the quiet officer and the thoughtful Queen helped shape a new spirit within the Commonwealth. They would speak of how leadership became gentler, how decisions grew wiser, and how people listened more carefully to one another. In every version of the story, there was always a moment of stillness, a single sentence spoken in honesty that changed everything. But for Miles, the truth remained simple. He had once looked at a powerful woman and spoken without fear. She had not punished him for his boldness. Instead, she had heard him, truly heard him, and turned that moment into a path neither of them expected. Now, whenever he walked down the silent hallways of the Aurora Dawn, he carried that memory like a quiet light inside him. The world around him shone the same as before, yet to him, every corner of it felt brighter. It was as if his words long ago spoken without thought still echoed softly through the ship with quiet grace, reminding everyone who listened that truth, when spoken from the heart, never fades.